And welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for tuning in. I decided, man, this debate that was between Alex O'Connor and Denise D'Souza, hope I'm saying his name right, it was really interesting. A lot of things came out of this. And again, as I was saying earlier, or in the last video, that it's really funny to sit back and to listen and observe Christians all over the internet that are making such a big deal about, about Billy Carson and all of this. And I'm like, he's been debunked a long time ago. It's nothing, he has a large following. That's about it. But, he's not really someone that I think reasonably minded people would consider is some type of biblical scholar. At best, he has some biblical knowledge, but I don't think anybody saw him as some kind of biblical scholar. I mean, he's more esoteric and he'll pull from the Bible and all of that, but I don't know. So I was like, I don't see how this is some kind of big thing. So what I did was I said, let me find a debate that's similar where you have one person that has some theology background or, some kind of biblical background, and then someone who doesn't. And let's take a look at that and see how that, in that scenario, let's look at this here. And because one of the issues that I had with the Billy Carson, Wes Huff debate was that the debate was centered around the text itself, what text says what versus, that kind of thing. And that's all good. If you're, I see that as playing in the playground. Like when you're playing in the playground of people who are committed and just 100%, we're about the Bible and I'm here to defend it no matter what. Well, as long as you're staying within the confines of the Bible, I mean, it's all the road is always going to turn right for them. You understand what I'm saying? But once you start taking the Bible and cross-referencing it with actual factual history, archaeological finds and all that other stuff, then that's when you begin to see the vulnerability of what many of these Bible scholars and everybody else, what they try to bring to the table. Because again, the Bible is a historical history. It's not historical. It's not a historical document. And so, but anyway, this same channel is called Pang Burn. They took another excerpt of this debate between the two, and this one's a little bit longer. And I think there's probably going to be 1 or 2 times, y'all, that I may interject, but I just want you to hear it for yourself. In this one, they're going to be focused on biblical contradictions. And yes, the Bible does have its share of contradictions, and we can go through a whole list of them, but I'm just going to let them do it for us. Okay. So let me go ahead and bring it up on the screen, and we're just going to sit back and kind of listen in and see what the two gentlemen have to say on this. Okay. Let's take a listen.
I was asking, for example, about Jesus' presentation at the Temple of Jerusalem after his birth. This is not like trying
I'm going to rewind that for you. Sorry about that.
I don't think this is an attempt. I was asking, for example, about Jesus' presentation at the Temple of Jerusalem after his birth. This is not like trying to describe a mushroom or the end of the world.
No. Okay, so now let's talk about that.
Hold on a second. This is a historical event that's being recorded by one New Testament writer at the same time as another New Testament writer says that the family had traveled to Egypt. I don't think this is an attempt at metaphor or allegory, as I would say of Genesis. Whether you think that is or not, I would say that in the case of the Gospels, we can agree that on at least some instances, this is a clear attempt at mundane history. This is not an attempt at writing some kind of metaphor to explain a truth that's otherwise unknowable to the human mind. It's a very straightforward attempt to record what actually happened, and they contradict each other.
They contradict each other because they're written by 4 different people.
Sure. So one of them is wrong.
Let me ask you this. If God were writing it, I'm quite sure he would have written it once. You would need 4.
Sure.
Okay?
So some of them are wrong then?
No. Okay, so when you say they're wrong, let's consider Luke's gospel for a minute.
Yep.
Luke is a medical doctor. Luke is not present at the events being described. Luke is virtually in the position of Thucydides writing the Peloponnesian War. Now, Thucydides did fight in the war, but in most of the events described by Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War, he wasn't there.
Making them very unreliable, right?
No, on the contrary. It is, in fact, the most reliable account of the Peloponnesian War that historians have.
Let's not say that it is reliable, though.
No, it is. What I'm trying to say is that when you're talking about historicity, and you're talking about historicity now in the ancient world, you have to recognize that these people are not approaching it as modern historians. Luke is going around interviewing people.
So let me ask this very, very straightforwardly then.
Okay.
Luke says that after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
What?
Well, you do. But let me.
Hold on for a second. Hold on. He said, who the heck cares? This is a very significant point, y'all. He said, who the heck cares? What? Well, if you're someone that believes in the Bible that it's the final word of God, you should care. And so what he's pointing out is, in fact, a contradiction. Would your Bible God contradict himself? I mean, this is just a question. That's all we're asking. It's an observation, and from that observation, a question is being asked. And what he's pointing out is absolutely correct. Not to mention, he brought up a little bit earlier an example. He was talking about how it was another individual who wrote about a war after the fact. Well, the Bible, when you look at when the Bible was actually first compiled, it's writing about events that took place thousands of years before. You understand what I'm saying? And so you got people thousands of years later writing about Moses, writing about and not just writing about Moses and writing about Abraham and all this, but all these little conversations and details of all their different, squabbles and, what he was thinking at that time. I mean, it reads like a daggone novel. And so we're to believe that somehow thousands of years later, that people were able to pick up a pen and say, okay, we're going to write this. We're going to jot it down. Now, I do understand Septuagint and all that stuff. What is claimed is that these documents were, in fact, pulling from other scrolls, other documents. But unfortunately, we don't have any of those things. We don't have anything. There's some remnants of stuff like the Dead Sea Scrolls or whatever. But even those have their own contradictions. And so, again, you got to understand, when you look at the Bible, you got to understand that what we see today as the Bible, the people who wrote that were writing from something that happened thousands of years before. And then once we get to, like, what was it? Let's see. When you get to 3 CE, 4 CE, around that time, when you start seeing these completed Bibles showing up on the scene, then once we start seeing that, we realize again that the authors of these books, of these what we call Bibles, they were writing for stuff about things and or events that took place thousands of years, talking about like 1400 BCE, going way, way back. And so how accurate are those things? You know what I'm saying? So these are the type of questions that I try to pose to Bible believers to get them to really start thinking and asking those questions. It's like if I were to, for example, write an account, like if I sat down, I got my pen and I got my piece of paper, and someone says, Dwayne, I want you to write with accuracy the conversations between a Civil War soldier and his general during the Civil War. I want you to write an accurate description of that conversation. How in the world am I able to do that? I wasn't there. And you're talking many, many, many years later. Well, this is the same level of thinking that people have when they read the Bible. They think that, oh, these people, they were inspired by, that's why they say it was inspired by the Holy Ghost came upon them. Again, we're back at faith again. We just have to believe it. You don't question these things. You just have to believe that this is how it came about. But when you look at it factually, they're writing text of accounts that took place thousands of years prior. And reason why I wanted to take that time, because a lot of people don't really realize that, So I'm gonna go back a little bit and then let it play out. Okay.
Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so
well,
do
you
probably
do.
the people who are listening to a debate about whether the Bible is true.
Let me say why what you care about is not only trivial, but indicates a kind of unwillingness to try to get what the text is trying to communicate.
I'll tell you why I don't think it's trivial. Because I think that the reason why Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, well, he tells us. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my son. Now, in Hosea, God is talking here about the nation of Israel. At least in this case, unlike the Matthew prophecy, the prophecy actually exists and we can interrogate it. It seems to me like what Luke is doing here is attempting to display Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. And in fact, he tells us that that's what he's doing. Therefore, if it is the case that Jesus didn't go to Egypt and didn't come out of Egypt on his return, then this would undermine Luke's attempts to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. That's why I think it is relevant.
Well, look.
And not trivial.
Right, but I think that the...
Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think it's a completely trivial point? If it's so trivial,
no, I think that the point,
why is it included in the first place?
The point, as you stated it before, is trivial. The point you're now raising is not trivial, but the point you're now raising is one in which you have 3 centuries of Jewish Christian disputation about whether Jesus is the Messiah. Okay, and by and large, the disputation breaks down in this way: the Jews are the biblical literalists, and the Christians are the sort of metaphorical readers. And I say this because let's take a very famous passage that bears on this very topic, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And the Jews go, you said the temple would be destroyed. Now, interestingly, Jesus did say the temple would be destroyed, and the temple was in fact destroyed in 70 AD. In fact, 40 years after Jesus said that, the temple was in fact physically razed to the ground, and the Jews dispersed in a huge diaspora. But my point is, Jesus doesn't reply that. Jesus doesn't say, hey, listen, wait 40 years. Jesus says, no, you're misreading me completely. When I said the temple, I was actually speaking of the temple of my body.
No, he doesn't tell them that.
But this is stated.
We're told that that's what he means.
We're told that's what he means. So what I'm getting at is, here you have a case where you have an event, you have a Jewish literalist reading and a Christian metaphorical reading.
Yep.
Another example, and
So would you say then the flight to Egypt is a metaphor? Is that what you're trying to say? In other words, I'm trying to understand what it is that you're doing here to actually answer the question that I'm asking you, which is about, because here's my theory, here's an idea.
Okay.
Luke, the author of Luke, invents the flight to Egypt in order to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, meaning that when we read Luke, we should note that where it appears that he's making historical claims, we should note his willingness to twist history in order to fulfill a theological
Well, you don't know
aim.
if he's doing that. You're assuming that. This is your theory.
No. What I'm saying is that that's one thesis to explain the contradiction between Luke and Matthew. If you want to say that it's trivial, then fine, but we still have to explain how it comes about. And what I'm saying is one idea of how this comes about leads to us undermining our trustworthiness of Luke. What I'm asking you for is your explanation that would not lead to us having to undermine the trustworthiness of Luke.
I don't have the ability to referee that passage. I'm not aware of this contradiction. I'll have to go back and look and see.
That's fine.
Go and look it up. But what I am doing is I'm questioning your methodology and your kind of what would I call it? You got the Jews and the Christians arguing about events, and they're very complex events, and they're very powerfully meaningful events. Like let's take, for example, Abraham and Isaac are going up the mountain. Mm-hmm. And Isaac says to Abraham something to the effect of, where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says to him, God will provide. God will provide. Now, in a Jewish reading, this whole thing has got to be understood in terms of, here's Abraham, he's willing to sacrifice his son, God says stop, it's a tale of obedience. In the Christian reading, it's not that, or it's not only that. The Christian reading is, Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So when Isaac says, where's the lamb? And Abraham says, God will provide, it is a foreshadowing of a significant event in the New Testament. Now again, as I say, the Jews and the Christians argued this for 3 centuries and more. I'm not even trying to adjudicate who's right, but I'm saying you're waltzing in, coming with neither of these 2 assumptions. In fact, I assume you think that the Old Testament is as mythological as the New.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, I need to.
And I guess what I'm saying is that people who read the Bible to understand what the Bible is trying to say and what we can learn from it, do what the Jewish rabbis did and do what theologians like Augustine and Anselm and so many others have done. They don't really do what you're doing, which is saying, hey, Luke must have talked to a guy who thought it happened over here, but in fact, you know, this guy says the roof was thatched, but another guy says they let the guy in through the roof who had to be healed. Contradiction. And I'm like, is this your way of trying to say the Bible is not true?
Yes, it is. The Old
Yes. Okay.
That's precisely what I'm doing. The Old Testament is not fully mythological. I think Genesis is mythological. I think that Exodus makes more of an attempt at history, but has mythological undertones. I think that the military conquests I mentioned in my opening statements are attempts at describing literal historical events. I think that
agree.
the Psalms are poetry. I think that Job is mythology. I don't think a man called Job actually existed, right? And so there are lots of different genres here. The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the Gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever, maybe you can send me an email about it later or something, that's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these. And in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to depict Jesus as the Passover lamb. Now, this is a contradiction if the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as historical in an area like that, then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? I would say for the same reason that Luke contradicts Matthew in the birth narratives, because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree at least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point? Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I would agree that.
Well, that definitely is a contradiction.
Well, it's not a contradiction because, Thucydides is relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other.
Sure.
It's not as if Thucydides is, so he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point, but the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given 4 perspectival accounts of Jesus' life. And they're not identical. In fact, as I say, if they were identical, you wouldn't need 4. The point of reading these, and I think the way to read them. Let me say a word. If you want to determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury, and by that I mean. Pick up the Gospel of Mark, the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document.
70 AD, would you say, for Mark?
Yes, I mean, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But
yes.
crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without it being anything miraculous?
This is a highly debated point because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has what seems to be at the very end an added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at. If you've never read the Bible, and we've all read the Bible in a way, I was raised Catholic, and so I was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to... What's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect. But the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women was disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark and I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they're the ones who find the tomb empty. This is like a little dubious because most people are going to go, well, yeah, we know, but women, you know. So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that, if I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as...
Well, I'm not... No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an argument...
Let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking about these texts as if they are historical texts. And the thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. Mm-hmm. And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the events. In other words, it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus' empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb?
3.
Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us. Right. So I don't think that this is this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay.
Look at it.
Sorry, y'all.
I was asking, for example...
Sorry, let me...
If people knew
hold
what
on,
kind of
y'all.
mess was
Hold
going
on.
on, just
I got everything coming up here. Anyway, I thought that was another great snippet there when it comes... I don't know what all that was. I thought it was a really great snippet there, again, of a debate that was quite revealing a lot of the limitations once you begin to look at what's being presented in the Bible. Specifically, they focus on the Gospels, which I did like, because you find a lot of, on one hand, you have Dinesh, claiming that these are just 4 different accounts from 4 different people who are seeing the same thing. We're just getting 4 different perspectives. However, you do see, when you look at the Gospels under closer inspection, how certain things are kind of, bent so that it fulfills certain things within the storyline and the timeline. And then when you read about like these scriptoriums, for example, when you go back in history and how, in Rome and all that, when they were writing and rewriting these Bibles and stuff like that, there was a lot of pressure on these different writers over the years to make sure that the story, there was some continuity there. And so you see this bending, if you will, of some of these storylines that are presented in the Bible to make it make sense. And so that's what they were pointing out in this. That's what he was pointing out in this debate here. And to see the Christian side of the house try to justify all of that, or then back away and say, what difference does it make? I mean, it's just really something, and this is why, like I said, again, it's so important. The facts are important, but it also underscores why Christianity is in fact a faith, is a belief. And as I always say over and over again, you can believe what you want to believe. You want to be a Christian? All right, fine, be a Christian. You want to be a Muslim? Be a Muslim, or whatever it is that you're into. But belief does not constitute or doesn't equal established fact, historical fact. It doesn't establish that. A belief is just that. And unfortunately, what religion does, it relies heavily on belief. And it leaves all these gaping holes that are never fully discussed, because if you try to discuss them amongst other Christians, then immediately the Christians will turn on you and say that you're an unbeliever. You're an unbeliever. Well, I'm trying to believe, but I can't believe this because this thing ain't matching. And then they'll come back and say, well, stop thinking about that. You got to have more faith. You got to have more of his spirit inside of you so that all of this can kind of make more sense. Oh, it ain't about I got to have more spirit in me. No, I'm just saying, explain these inconsistencies. And you'll find that a lot of Christians seem to have a hard and very difficult time when it comes to that. So what the usual reaction is, and this is on my personal experience, is that they will turn on you, and now all of a sudden you are the problem. Now all of a sudden there's something wrong with you. You're not really hearing from the Lord. You need to pray more, that kind of thing. So that's why I do like some of these debates that are out here. I'm not really a debate person, but I do like well put together debates where both sides are respectful, right? And we get to hear what each side has to present. And especially debates as it pertains to this kind of stuff here. It's, if anything, if you are a Christian, I really do hope things like this do challenge you to dig deeper and to ask more questions. Take it from me. This is coming from someone who's been in Christendom for well over 40 years. And I know I've seen it all, and I know what it's like to have certain questions bubbling inside in the back of your brain, and you just don't feel comfortable in asking those things because if you ask it, people are going to get mad. Well, why would people get mad if you're asking a question? You know what I'm saying? And so that doesn't sound right. People should welcome questions. This is how we learn. So that's what my encouragement to you is that as you are going through your Bible and you're quoting these same scriptures over and over again, really begin to start quizzing yourself on these things and asking yourself, does it line up? Do these things line up with actual facts? And we talk about this stuff all the time. So do yourself a favor and do that. And I think you'll be off to a very good start in expanding the brain that the Creator has given all of us, right? So that's what I would encourage you to do. But I thought this was a great debate. We'll be adding more content to this platform, more and more. So just be on the lookout for that. Okay. So thanks so much for tuning in. You guys take care, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Thank you.